Well, before we get to our guest speaker, just want to talk about this church I'm familiar with. They held a marriage seminar, and the priest asked Luigi, as his 50th wedding anniversary approached, to share some insight as how he managed to stay married to the same woman all those years. Luigi replied to his audience, "Well, I tried to treat her well and spend money on her, but the best thing I did was take her to Italy for our 20th anniversary." The priest said, "Luigi, you are an inspiration to all husbands here today. Please tell the audience what you planned for your wife for your 50th anniversary." Luigi proudly replied, "I plan to go to Italy and get her back." Bear with me on this, because I think it's really important for us to understand the background of our guest speaker, and so that you can kind of understand from where he talks and what he's telling us about. So his recent research focused on strategic issues related to the restructuring of the international auto industry and trends in globalization, leadership, technology, market factors, and human resource requirements. He's the chairman of Auto Harvest, an organization created to facilitate the flow of intellectual property in and out of the auto industry and within the industry. He's also chairman of Building America's Tomorrow, an organization aimed at increasing the number of K through 12 students considering careers related to manufacturing. He was formerly a member of the Energy Engineering Board of the National Research Council, the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Pact Select Panel, the NASA Subcommittee on Energy, and the Michigan Strategic Economic Investment and Commercialization Board. He is also director of 3 automotive-related companies. Dr. Cole was formerly a member of the Executive Committee of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and the Michigan Renewable Fuels Commission. He was formerly co-chair of Detroit Renaissance's Road to Renaissance project in the fall of 2006. At the University of Michigan, he is a member of the Mechanical Engineering External Advisory Board and formerly a member of the Biological Station Advisory Committee. He is a member of the Denso Foundation Board and the Executive Committee of the Ohio State Center for Automotive Research. He was formerly a member of the Business Development Committee of Ann Arbor Spark. He is currently a member of the Professor Sam Wu Manufacturing Leadership Award Committee. He was formerly a director of the Automotive Hall of Fame, the Original Equipment Suppliers Association, and a member of the Board of Trustees of Hope College. He is active in SAE, including serving 2 terms on the Board of Directors. In February 1986, he was named Fellow of SAE. He is also active in the Engineering Society of Detroit and was elected to Fellow status in 1990. In 2000, he received the Engineering Society's highest award, the Horace H. Rackham Medal. He is also a member of the Society of Manufacturing Engineers and was elected to Fellow grade in 2009. In 1993, he received the National Automobile Dealers Association Foundation's International Freedom of Mobility Award. In the fall of '98, he was named as the Marketing Educator of the Year by the Society of Marketing Executives. He's also been and is actively involved in the startup of 9 different Ann Arbor-based companies. His technical and policy consulting experience includes a variety of assignments for industry, labor, and government. And he has spoken to more than 1,000 different groups on automotive issues. Please welcome David E. Cole.
Well, thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I can't even remember some of the things on the list there. Time flies when you're having fun. But all it means is I'm old. My wife and I have been married for 53 years, and I kind of wonder how it's lasted that long. And one of the things that she never really appreciated in me as a former professor, one of the things that we have as an attribute, we think of it as an attribute, is the gift of criticism. And Carol and I used to play tennis together a lot, and I would always make suggestions to her about how to hold the racket, how to step into the shot. When I turned 60, I came home, and here was a set of golf clubs sitting in the house in our living room. And she said, you know, you said you always wanted to play golf when you're older. I said, you're older. Her brother-in-law owned some shops called Bavarian Village that had golf clubs as one of their things. And, well, in any event, I said, oh, that's wonderful. I said, where are your clubs? She said, you're playing golf, I'm playing tennis. And I think we all have those kind of things in our lives. The old adage that happy wife, happy life is absolutely true, and I see that reinforced. Well, first of all, congratulations to all of you as a part of a very important company in the auto business, Chrysler and now FCA. And I can remember a couple of things. For example, back in the old days, one of our people bought some Chrysler stock at about 10. He said it can't get any cheaper. Well, it went down to about 2. Well, I bought some at about 4. And of course, as it went back up again, it went past 10 to 12. One of our guys sold his stock, and he was happy for about 2 days. And then it went up to about 100. And then, as you all remember, the merger of equals occurred. And I can tell you my largest stock holding of anything is Daimler today, and it was something that I really had not planned on. Another incident I remember, and it's unfortunate that Sergio has passed away, but this was the event when Sergio at the Chrysler Tech Center had invited people from all over, and since I was an academic and was involved in a lot of different stuff, I was one of the people that received an invitation. And this was a beautiful invitation, and it said, what should you wear? And it says, please wear for men, please wear a suit and tie. Well, anyway, showed up, there were lots of people there in their suit and ties, and there was one guy in a black sweater. And it was really an absolutely fascinating thing to see. And I did actually spend some private time with Sergio in his office, which was not in the traditional office building, but was over in the engineering center. And he was a really amazing individual. I'm sure you have a variety of opinions on him, but it was fascinating to have a chance to visit with him. Well, I'm going to talk about what is going on in this business, and that's why I say the auto future wild to wilder. I used to think this was a wild business 50 years ago, and 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but I'll tell you, nothing is like what we're seeing right now. It's an industry that is in a period of amazing transition, and we don't know exactly what's going to be on the path. One thing we do know is the old business model is broken, and if we look at the old model, we see things like physical prototypes. We tried to make things lean. We often had leaders that tended to be more king-like, job for life, focused kind of on the individual. And what we're doing is entering now something that's very different. We don't do really physical prototypes anymore. It's mostly virtual prototypes. Life is in the computer. We have sort of a flow of people. We talk about not cooperation, but co-opetition. We compete and we cooperate between entities. For example, for a number of years, Ford and GM have been developing transmissions together, but they compete over another place. In fact, one of the most fascinating things is, as you're aware, Ford went to aluminum in their F-Series trucks a number of years ago, but they had to use glue and rivets because GM owned the patents on resistance welding of aluminum. And those are some of the things that you kind of don't see or hear about, but it just adds to the fascination of the industry. Now we're looking at leaders that are more coaches. We're looking at, it's not just lean, it's agile. You have to be able to change and move. For example, one of the leanest plants a number of years ago in North America was the Atlanta plant building the Ford Taurus and Sable. It's gone. It's under a runway of the airport. It had the lowest labor content per vehicle, but it was rigid. It could not adjust to the fact that people want to change their mind as far as models. They were kind of stuck with what they had. Industry is highly unstable, and it's not in its final form. So if you if you don't like instability, this is not a very good business to be around today. And it kind of reminds me, my wife and I, you mentioned Italy, we've been there several times, and one year we visited the Colosseum in Rome. And I said, wow, standing in the floor of the Colosseum, it reminds me of Detroit. And the Colosseum, you had the gladiators trying to kill one another, and they'd look to the crowd and thumbs up or thumbs down. And I said, this is just like the auto industry today. I'm one of the people sitting up in the stands watching this go on, because it is an amazing period of time. And anybody that assumes that this is the industry of the long term, it's not true. It's in transition in a big way. Then we have things like the Trump effect. We really didn't realize what was going to happen. We would look at trade, regulations, economics, taxes, international relations, and I think one of the things that we would have to include, and we see this daily, is surprises are likely. And that's the reality of the business that we are in. And I don't think it's going to change very much very soon. That is, change is going to occur, but it's not going to change from change. We're not going to see stability for a long time. Another, I think, issue is that success is not just cost and revenue, it's agility, and it's very much related to innovation because of the rate of change of things that are going on. And you think of these changes, wow. We were talking at lunch today, you talk about your iPhone and a computer. How many of you in school, and many of you, most of you are fairly senior, remember reading a book called 1984? And 1984 was way down the road. 1984 is way behind us, and I think it's happened in one way, shape, or form. But we are in a totally different era, and so the business model of this era is fundamentally different. And the challenge is to step up to that kind of thing. World of vanishing boundaries. Many years ago, one of the things that we did was called a Traverse City Management Briefing. And in fact, most of the leaders of the industry, Chrysler CEOs spoke there at different times over the years, as well as other leaders at Chrysler. And we had a theme one year, a world of vanishing boundaries. And when you think of it from a personal standpoint, we like a nice structure. This is my space, this is your space. That's gone. I think of students, and I have a couple of students here in the room, and often students would come in the first day of class, they'd sit down in a chair, come back the second day, somebody would be in the chair that they claimed the first day, and they were offended. You're in my seat. And that's kind of who we are as humans. It's my space and it's your space. And that's the reality of the world of us, but the world of reality is very different. Another, I think, important issue, and this is to kind of draw something from Bo Schembechler, and that was it's the team, the team, the team. Now, Bo recruited students, athletes from all over, and those, as well as other colleges, you have these recruited young athletes. They were all adored, all American, all state, or whatever, and now they're coming together, and they're not the center of the focus anymore. It's the team that's the focus. And one of our challenges is how do we keep that team image going? Because particularly with the complexity that we're dealing with today, nobody is smart enough to be able to do everything. And one of our challenges is to bring that together. And historically, I think we can all recognize that we have seen king leaders, and king leaders kind of tried to run the whole show. You can't do that anymore. In fact, when I hear people talk about it's me or my rather than we or us, it's a different thing. A number of years ago, I was sitting at my desk in Ann Arbor and got a call from Bill Ford. He said, we're going to bring somebody in to run Ford. This had gone from Jack Nasser. Bill then had become the CEO. And he said, I don't know anything about this company. I've worked here. I don't know anything about sales and marketing, production, management. We're going to bring in this guy from Boeing, Alan Mulally. And a couple of days, this was about 3 weeks before the announcement. And the question that Bill had is, how do we introduce somebody from another industry to the auto industry? And then I spent some time on the phone with Alan. And when I hung up the phone, I said, my goodness, this guy is an absolute coach leader. And that is the kind of leader that he was. Now, the hard thing that somebody has to deal with is following a good leader. As some of you may know, Mark Fields, he lasted a couple of years and was gone. This is the reality of the world that we live in today. Another is systems thinking. That is, you can never take your eye off the big picture, even as you're working on the details. And this is something that all of us kind of struggle with. It might be a transmission engineer who is working on this little part and finds a way to save a nickel, but it costs $1 somewhere else in the transmission because of the nickel that he saved on that part. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So whether we're talking about engineering or the business, it means that you can never take your eye off the big picture, even as you're working on a detail. Now, there are mega issues today, lots of them. You know, technology, materials, people, politics, mobility, international events, natural events. Remember a few years ago, the tsunami and earthquake in Japan that took out a couple of key Japanese suppliers and essentially shut their industry down for a while. Autonomous vehicles, and more. I have never seen a time when there are more significant factors in play. Future market, you can assume that I think disruptions are likely, surprises. What about interest rates? We're kind of arguing about that right now. We're seeing a tip up in interest rates. President Trump is saying that shouldn't go so fast. We'll see. Politics, economy, energy issues, global events. We have never seen a time when there are more factors in play that in one way, shape, or form are influencing this industry. And that's not going to go away, in my judgment, for a long time. Some choke points. One of the ones that we're really concerned about is talent. Every supplier, every manufacturer right now, when you ask them, what's your major problem? About 75% of them will say, we can't find the people with an appropriate education. You know, the number one shortage in Michigan are skilled trades and technicians. And the typical parent says, I want my kid to have a hands-on job, meaning hands on a computer key, not building dies or things like that. We've got to change that. Every skill is really important. We're short of tooling. We're short of suppliers. Suppliers are now at capacity. There's been consolidation. Equipment is a big deal. Natural events, who knows what's going to occur. You look at the recent hurricane that occurred down in Florida. It wasn't expected to be that much, and all of a sudden it was a 4. And materials. On the talent issue, there's a couple of areas that I'm really concerned about that I consider gap areas. One was discussed a little bit with the inner city. I grew up in Detroit, went to school in Detroit. I applied to the University of Michigan. That was the only place I applied. For years, I wanted to be a farmer. I spent summers at my grandparents' farm, and I love farming. And my dad and mom both grew up in farms, and I wanted to go to Michigan State and study agriculture. Finally, we had a serious discussion over lunch one day with my dad. He said, you know, there's a difference between a vacation farmer and a real farmer. Engineering really started to look really good. But the talent, out of the city of Detroit, public schools, everybody said going to the University of Michigan would be the hardest thing you've ever done. It was like going from grade 11 to grade 12. What we did not realize is how good the city of Detroit schools were at that period of time. Today, for example, young boys, the pass rate on the standardized test in the city of Detroit is about 2%. It's not like it's 100% in other places, but 50-60% is fairly common. We have tremendous work to do. The other area we have a lot of work to do is with young women. And one of the things that we're finding, in fact, it was interesting, the day that Mary Barrow was announced as the CEO of GM, I probably talked to 20 reporters. What do you think about a woman as the CEO of GM? Good deal. Same day, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal on research on men's and women's brains. And what they did is they put electrodes on their head and they followed how they thought. Well, with men it was like this. With women it was all over the place. And on the conclusion it said this would suggest that women are better at multitasking. And I looked at it and I said, well, duh. I learned that from a mother, sister, and a wife. And that is consistent today with some very good leadership qualities. Sometimes men tend to be a little bit too focused, but if you're a leader, you need to be able to handle multiple of different activities and be a coach in the process. and I look at my wife cooking, raising kids, and things like that. It was pretty remarkable. I could not have done that. But we need to bring more young women into the game, and we need to bring more urban kids into the game, and getting a higher level of education is really crucial if that's going to happen. Talent. Boomers are retiring. All jobs require special skills. And to give you what I think is a scary number, is that if you look at manufacturing, that's auto plus whatever is made in this country, we're going to be short over 2 million people with the appropriate skills. And when we think about manufacturing, it's not just the shop floor. And the average person, frankly, when they think about manufacturing, what they see is an assembly line that's about 40 years old. It was about a year ago, one of the women in sales at FCA told me that they're short about 2,000 diagnostic technicians at dealerships. And these jobs pay $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 a year. So how can we get that message across? How can we bring people to understand what manufacturing is? And one of the things that we have seen is that people take manufacturing for granted. Look at this room here. Other than us, everything else was manufactured. You know, eyeglasses, tie, table, chairs, whatever. And that's not obvious to the average person. So somehow we have to communicate more effectively what's going on. And obviously, the K through 12 pipeline is not adequate, and manufacturing today is extraordinarily high tech. One of the reasons that if I could be younger, I wouldn't be, because I'm not smart enough to be able to handle what's required in the modern manufacturing world today. Building America's Tomorrow. If you go to YouTube, just put in Building America's Tomorrow, you'll see a 10-minute video that kind of illustrates that. But we really have a problem in getting young people into this game. Now let's talk about some other issues. One is very contemporary, CAFE, corporate average fuel economy. You probably are quite familiar with it. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in terms of the Trump administration, particularly in the relationship with California and the other dozen or so states. But one of the most important aspects of this, and I don't know how well you can see this, is what is a critical issue, and that is to put this in the perspective of the average person. And if you think of an average person that drives 15,000 miles a year, and you look at three different values for fuel prices, $1.50, of course, about 10 years ago we think we'd never have that again, but we had it a couple of years ago. Now it's about $3. But look at the shape of that curve. If you can go from 10 miles per gallon to 20 miles per gallon, you're halfway to zero. To get the next half, you have to go to infinity miles per gallon, and those of you that have some technical background realize that's really tough to do. Unless you have a big wind sail on top of your car. But as you increase the fuel economy, the value to the consumer gets smaller and smaller, and the trade-off between the added cost of the vehicle and the savings on fuel is a really big issue. And one of our challenges when we look at people that make policy is to get them to understand the reality of what consumers are really like. And too often, and I've dealt with political people for many, many years, they kind of live in a tower that is very different. There are exceptions. For example, Rick Snyder, he understands business. A lot of people don't, and this is one of the problems that I think we see too often in Washington today. Material competition. It's changing. What about the current production system? What about the economics, the value of weight savings, the Ford versus GM example that I mentioned a little bit earlier? One has gone aluminum. GM is focused on kind of mixed materials, may include some aluminum. And nothing is for sure forever, and that's certainly true with respect to materials. It's one of those areas that we get caught up with CAFE issues and talent issues. This little thing of materials is a really big deal. And it's not going to become less of a big deal. What about future powertrains? We got gasoline engines. My research over history was gasoline engines. Doug Oren, you worked with gasoline engines. We still have a lot of them, gasoline, diesel, hybrids, electric, fuel cells. Tell me what the answer is. Nobody knows. We just are not sure of what's going to happen here. Now, one of the important things is if you're a manufacturer that can afford it, you want to be playing all these games so that when the right one emerges, you can begin to play that game. That's one of the real challenges that industry faces today. Future fuels, petroleum, biofuels. We've been talking about that a lot in the past. We're starting to talk about it again. Hydrogen. Ammonia can actually be a fuel without carbon. Now, there are some tricks. The answer is not clear. Now, as an observer of the industry, I love this. I mean, I just love the confusion. You know, it's like the people that were at that old thing in the year 1000 or 00 at the Roman Colosseum. I mean, that was entertainment. This is entertainment unless you're in the middle of the Colosseum floor. Future gasoline price, you know, we don't know what it's going to be. And breakthrough areas, advanced batteries. Right now, one of the big questions in batteries is the cost of batteries. I was with one of the manufacturers, advanced people, a few weeks ago, and the number generally is $100 a kilowatt hour. That's kind of, if we can get there. And what I heard is $65 a kilowatt hour. And I said, wow. I mean, we're dealing with some game changers. What is mobility? Moving people and stuff. You know, you've got Uber and Lyft, and you've got trikes running around powered by electricity on city streets. Autonomous vehicles, crazy kind of thing. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But in autonomy, the talk is ahead of reality. And you might as well deal with that. Is that we kind of try to compete with one another on the basis of talking, and it's another world when we get into it. And then, of course, advanced material systems. I mentioned earlier. This is not going to change. It's going to be moving fast, and the complexity is going to really be amazing. The trick is, with all of this stuff happening, how do you provide an affordable product to consumers? And that's a tremendous challenge. Autonomous vehicle, as I said, huge potential, consumer behavior. You know, Waymo, part of Google, has been running some autonomous vehicles around for quite a bit. There are in actually quite a few accidents. One of the common accidents is the Waymo vehicle comes to a traffic light, it turns yellow. What does the Waymo do? It stops. The guy behind the Waymo vehicle says, I can make that light and crash. And so when you talk about autonomy, you know, the full autonomy, so-called level 5, is you're asleep in the back seat on a trip. That's past our lifetime. Maybe a couple of you know, but it's a long ways away. And the consumer behavior, you're also aware that there have been some accidents, and of course they get very over-publicized. In a Tesla in Florida, the driver had it on autopilot. A 18-wheeler crossed in front of him. The vision saw past the 18-wheeler. He drove under it and cut his head off. There was a accident in, I think, of an Uber vehicle where there was a driver, and the driver was looking away, and it killed a woman pushing a bicycle. Those were relatively few accidents. There was another one with a Tesla hitting a brick wall in the Silicon Valley. Tremendous publicity, but what that does is it causes the average person to be really cautious about the idea of autonomy. So it's not just the technology, it's that interface with the customer. Technology and cost. One of the key technologies is called LiDAR. It was developed, the first one, by a company called Velodyne in Israel, $75,000. They had a huge step, $7,500. Everybody's all excited about the tech people and how much money. You know how many cars you're going to sell with a $7,500 LiDAR system plus all the other stuff that's required? Not very many. You know, maybe a few Silicon Valley people with a lot of money, but that's about it. And so the whole technology cost issue. The winners are very impossible right now to pick out. Some people are talking, some people are not. Some people are talking way too much. And we have this distorted picture of reality in this respect. In terms of winners, we don't know. There was an interesting article in last week's, I think, Automotive News. I don't know how many of you still take it, but there were a group of 3 lawyers who wrote about liability. And I think you can assume that the Bernsteins and the Feigers are salivating over the prospect of having autonomous vehicles on road, particularly with the interface with vehicles that do not have that technology. The policy issue is wide open, and it's going to have an enormous impact ultimately. This is a good thing. The potential here for about 90% reduction of fatalities, injuries, accidents, secondary benefits, significant reduction in the cost of emergency rooms. Lots of good things are in the possibility of happening, but not quite as fast as I think some people would expect. Knowledge is the competitive edge today. If you're not smart, you're going to have a problem. Innovation is really important, as I commented earlier. Innovative people and companies win. It's teaming. And by the way, one of the things that I should have mentioned with respect to the whole issue of talent is that we have not painted an accurate picture of what auto is. You ask the average person what an auto company is, and they'll say, well, that's a Ford, FCA, GM, Toyota, Honda. About 40 years ago, less than 10% of the IP came out of suppliers. Today, it's over 50% and growing. The suppliers are still largely invisible to the average person, and that's a problem. But innovation, leadership is critical. Look across traditional boundaries. Tell you a quick story. I was giving a talk in Traverse City a few months ago to their econ club, and afterwards I met with the manufacturing council, and their big problem is, by the way, they've got over 250 manufacturers in the Traverse City area. And they said that we can't find people, talent. And afterwards, one of the people came up to me. It was a fellow from Stryker. You know, Stryker is a med tech company, builds joints and things like that. And he said, well, you know, I joined Auto Harvest. This is the thing that we developed to connect people related to intellectual property. And he said, you know, we've got a lot of intellectual property. Maybe somebody in auto can use it. Maybe somebody in auto has got something we could use. One of the things that we don't do well, and it's the reason we created Auto Harvest, is to connect people that would not normally find one another. It's like a dating site. What people do is up to them. It just makes the connection. There was a former executive VP at Chrysler. You may remember his name, Bob Lutz. He's still around. And he had a phrase that I think I heard first when he was at Chrysler, and it was that sometimes it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. And that was now I don't recommend that for everybody. It's something that you have to be very cautious about. But anyway, Auto Harvest is something that we created to connect people related to intellectual property. The basic message today is that it's getting wild, it's going to get wilder, and that's the reality of this business. So fasten your seatbelts. When you think about auto, the fun is just beginning. The excitement is just beginning. I love to fish. I love to play golf. If I make a great golf shot, I really feel excited. I catch a big fish, I feel excited. On the other hand, I can remember fishing on the west branch of the Sturgeon River. I had to hike in a mile. This is up near Wolverine to get to this place. On the way in, I noticed all these shredded berry bushes. What could have shredded those berry bushes? Well, anyway, I'm down to the river. I just caught a nice brown trout, and I heard this noise, and all I could think of is, here I am, want to be more than any other place in the world, and there's another fisherman coming into the river. And I looked, and it was a bear. And I got really excited. And when you put both kinds of excitement together, it's really interesting. Another thing, I was fishing with a cousin in the Upper Peninsula, upper part of the Tequan River. We hiked in this old way up, and we were way away from people. Then we took this railroad grade out. It wasn't used anymore. The bushes were all grown down close to the railroad grade. And we got to the same spot at the same time as a big black bear. He reacted more quickly than we did. He was more afraid than we were. But it got our attention. Well, thanks very much for your time this morning or afternoon now. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm happy to try to respond to some questions that you might have. You know, you look at all the techies over there. When I think about techies,
be nice.
I'm thinking of junior high kids.
There's some old techies.
They're old techies, yeah. But the modern techie typically is in junior high school. I look at my grandkids, and the stuff. You got any questions, Grandpa? I can answer them.
They aren't qualified for retirement yet.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Hopefully they will be at some point. Did anybody have any questions? There's a lot of different things going on back here.
One thing you didn't talk about at all was ethanol and fuel.
Right.
It's always been annoying to me that we get poorer gas mileage to support our farmers that might get their support from overseas markets rather than from us.
Well, the E85 is a big deal, and you're aware that this is one of the issues in the political campaign right now. Ethanol is a biofuel. It comes from corn. In fact, a very significant fraction of the corn produced in the U.S. today is used for making ethanol. It's primarily a political issue. Ethanol can have some serious consequences in small engines or engines that weren't prepared for it. I know place up north, we have some boats and motors. And one of the things that we always put in the fuel is something to fix the ethanol so it won't separate. If it separates, you've got some real problems. Doug, were you involved in some of the ethanol work we did years ago? No, that was methanol, actually. That was some of the research efforts, so we're very familiar with what it is. And we'll see. It's one of those things more defined by politics than anything else. Yeah, I've got a question here.
Yeah. Through my working career, it seemed like most of the big three, anyway, rejected the apprentice programs for skilled trade training and techies as well. And now it seems to be coming back. What's your vision on that a bit? Because it was very frustrating to me. They seemed like, don't you want to build within? Maybe they didn't like to do it because after they got training, the people left. But the fact is that it's ever so apparent they need this.
Well, I think part of it is sometimes, and I've watched these companies for years, sometimes you have financial guys and they want to take cost out wherever they can. And sometimes you have people that understand that you need some cost somewhere. And the trades issue is a very big deal. And now we're seeing more trade programs. We're beginning to talk about it a little bit more. As I mentioned earlier, the number one shortage in Michigan of talent is skilled trades and technicians. In fact, I tell a story. A doctor's wife had a problem with the plumbing. Called the plumber. The plumber came, fixed the problem on the way out of the door, handed her the bill. She looked at it and said, "My goodness, my husband's a doctor. He doesn't make that much money." The plumber looked at her. "I didn't make that much money when I was a doctor either." And the fact is that if you look, for example, in Germany, Germany has a two-track where kind of people separate. Part of it go to the technicians and the skilled trades. Others become more into the theory stuff. And they have got adequate balance of understanding of the value of these. We don't here. And part of what we need to do is communicate effectively that working with your hands and doing things is really important. And it also means that, in fact, I'll tell you a fairly accurate story. 40 years ago, 3 guys walk into an auto plant, they're school dropouts, they meet the foreman. And the foreman says, just do this repetitively and life will be good. Pretty soon the foreman's gone, it's a self-directed work team. 40 years have gone by, technology has flowed in, they've learned that, now they're leaving. The productivity improvement is roughly that 3 to 1. That is, those 3 technicians are replaced by 1 person. We can't find that 1 person. That 1 person now has to have a community college degree, and we don't have it. And when you look at the potential gravity in terms of the shortage of a spectrum of talent, it is really serious. I get a call from one of my former students about a year ago, and I can't remember his name. It was, maybe some of you guys would remember, but he said his son just graduated from engineering at the University of Michigan, and he has a job offer from everybody he talked to. He said he's got a serious girlfriend, they're planning to get married, she graduated with a political science degree and she can't get anybody to even talk to her. And why are we not coaching and counseling people more effectively in terms of some of the career paths that are open and fit those with the skills that we have? One of the things that I've discovered for years is that we're not all the same. We have different capabilities, and we somehow try to shape some people's capabilities into a field where they're not going to be as good. You got a question back there?
You hear a lot these days about potential mergers. What mergers do you think might occur in the next 4 or 5 years? And the second question, who might be a good partner for FCA?
Well, that was my topic. As I understood it, there was something close with Volkswagen. And there had been some apparently back and forth, some of you may have been involved. And to me, that would have been absolutely the ideal merger in terms of complementarity between, when you look at Ram, you look at Jeep, you look at minivan. I mean, these are spectacular products, spectacular lines. Who's next? I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but the Dieselgate situation for Volkswagen is costing them well over $30 billion. That's just absolutely unbelievable. And it's not over with. It's still going on. And who knows? I do think FCA needs to have a partner. There has been discussion of a Chinese company that would be in this, but need a partner. And one of the challenges is with advanced technology, and I think the debt kind of got into okay situation at FCA here fairly recently. But when you look at the stuff that's going on in autonomy and advanced powertrain, you need a partner. And we'll see. If anybody of you has any inside information, I promise not to tell anybody, except my broker. Yes?
With 3 of the trends that you talked about, mobility, ride sharing, and autonomy, how do you see that impacting both the volume planning of the industry and the product, both the volume planning and product planning, with 90% of the time a vehicle sits in the garage or in the parking lot. And as we get more utilization and more productivity out of the vehicle itself, does that have an impact on the industry in terms of its volume and the number of plants we need?
You know, that's a very good question, because the first presumption that people are making, particularly people that don't know much about the industry, is that we'll need far fewer vehicles. But when you're going to operate a vehicle 200,000 miles a year, 150,000 miles a year, it's running all the time, they're not going to last as long as they have today. Another interesting thing, and I just saw this data last week, for an Uber car or a Lyft car, to pick somebody up and take them from one place to another, compared to that person having their own car, they use about 1.5 miles compared to the 1 mile. So the mileage accumulated on an Uber to move that person from one place to another, and you can look at it in terms of fuel consumed or whatever. And this whole area is fraught with uncertainty and misinformation. And one of the challenges that I think we have is to try to get people to think a little bit more deeply about some of the things that are going on. With respect to autonomy, for example, the full autonomy, that is, you sleep in the back seat anywhere, anytime driving, is probably 30 years away. It's a long, long ways away. I think the autonomy that's going to have the greater impact. Today, you're well aware that we have a lot of things like adaptive cruise control, blind spot detection, lane departure warning. I have those, but I can make a mistake. I can turn into that car next to me. Well, the technology will keep me from doing that, and that's really not very far away. We have a standard in 2022 that will prevent you from running into somebody if you're not watching. That'll be across the industry. This is it's a crazy situation. My personal view is that we may have some modest downturn in sales related to this, but nowhere as much as somebody has forecast. The trick is to be profitable in whatever you make, and that's one of the reasons that the industry absolutely loves people retreating from sedans to crossovers. And you're all aware of this, but one of the things that most people think of crossovers as SUVs. Crossovers are cars that are designed, they have the structural characteristics of a car, good fuel economy, structural rigidity. They're really cars that look like SUVs. Yeah. Yeah, it's on.
With respect to the future of automated cars, do you think the software companies will control the traditional auto companies, or vice versa? There's a design issue there. What do you think the Tesla experience will consider that?
Yeah, well, the customers today are very suspicious, and they'll learn. And that's why we're a long ways from the really highly sophisticated asleep in the backseat car. Kind of a fascinating thing with respect to technology, we're seeing sort of a merger that people talk about between Detroit and the Silicon Valley. There was a book written by Clay Christensen, who was in the Harvard B School in the mid-90s. It was called Innovator's Dilemma. And an interesting thing about it, he does a case study on computer disk drives, which we thought were really hot at the time. Kind of gone now. Maybe some of us older guys may have some left, but every next generation of disk drive, as they got smaller, was done by somebody else, and the one that was there before disappeared. In fact, I wrote a little essay for myself that I call Manufacturing Renaissance. And what we are seeing today, in my judgment, is what I would call a commoditization of tech. I talked about that LiDAR that sees 75,000, 7,500. That's going to be a $100 part of this vehicle at some point. And we've had this idea that if it's tech, it's really important. The fact is, if tech is not embedded in something physical, it has no value. Now, you can have the greatest chip in the world sitting here beside me doing nothing, and it has no value. It has to be embedded in something. And what I see is that we are going to see a renaissance in manufacturing, because ultimately that real estate, a house, a car, if we can't do that effectively, the technology doesn't mean anything. And I'll give you an example of technology. I was on a board of a company in Ann Arbor called Mechanical Dynamics. It was actually started by a faculty colleague of mine. And it had the Adams software. Some of you are in engineering familiar with Adams. It enables you to optimize linkages. And it could do it to about 99% of perfection. And it was a great example of design turned over to technology. This 99, what's the next 0.5% worth? Not much. And what we're beginning to see, and iPhone is beginning to see this, is that you get to a point where the added value isn't that great. Another interesting story in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was about a year ago, was related to IPOs and initial public offerings. And there were lots of them. They come out of the valley all the time. I think 2 or 3 had been quite successful, that had done well. A bunch of them had gone bankrupt, were out, gone. The average one that survived was trading at half of the IPO price. So what we're seeing, I think, is a reality coming into the tech community that is really important. So don't give up figuring out how to make things, because I think that's going to be increasingly important. And the renaissance that is occurring in manufacturing today is really part of that. As I said, if that chip, that LiDAR, gets down to $100, the potential profitability of that is not very high. The value in the car that this is in is really high. And I think we're going to see that the people that make things become, after this period of transition that we're in now are going to become very, very prosperous. And as I mentioned earlier, if anybody has any inside information on an FCA deal with somebody, I promise not to tell only one person if you tell me. Thanks very much. Question?
Is the lack of talent a global issue, say for China or some other?
Talent is a worldwide problem. For example, in Germany, one of the reasons that they were encouraged people coming out of the Middle East is because of a talent shortage. What they found is they didn't have the education to be productive in their society, and that's really caused some serious difficulties. In Japan, just to give you an example, I don't know if you're aware of it, Japan does not have a lot of immigration, very minimal. The birth rate in Japan is about 1.3. Another aspect of Japan is that they have not taken great advantage of women in their economy. And their talent problem is unbelievable. But Germany, China, one-child policy, aging population, the talent issue really is worldwide. And it's going to get more and more serious. It's tough here, but compared to Japan, I'll tell you a quick story. Back in the 80s, we had a project when I was still an engineering prof, but also at the UMTRI, the Transportation Research Institute, and it was jointly with the Center for Japanese Studies. But Shoichiro Toyota had been in World War II. He was a kid. And his question was, how in the world could the U.S. have mechanized an army and defeated Japan and Germany so quickly? And in any event, we were back and forth with Japan a bunch of times. All the Japanese manufacturers, all the Chrysler was involved in the study. Maybe some of you here were a part of that. But it was fascinating because he wanted to understand. He paid for it, but everybody participated because of the knowledge that was created. One of the things that we did was called a Delphi forecast. And this is a forecast where you ask experts in a field about their vision for the future. They participate confidentially. Nobody knows who said what, but you get a picture, kind of a statistical distribution. And we did a parallel one in Japan to the one we did here. Here you get this nice normal distribution of how many V8 engines in 10 years or how many pounds of aluminum or whatever. And in Japan, that distribution looked like this. And Toyota-san looked at that and he said, we all think alike. And that's the reason that Toyota has two major facilities in Ann Arbor, is that he had to get away from the narrowness of views that were part of their structure. And you probably haven't heard that story before, but it was really interesting. Akio Toyota, his son, is now the CEO of Toyota. In fact, his first presentation in the U.S. was at our management briefing in Traverse City a number of years ago. And we've never had quite one like that because he had about 10 handlers around him all the time to make sure that he wasn't going to say the wrong thing. It was really fascinating. We normally, like in the middle day, we had sort of the CEO day, and everybody would gather as a panel. And they said, no, we can't have him be a part of the panel. We had to have a separate question and answer for him because they were concerned. They wanted to kind of manage what he could have said. Other questions? I don't know, what's your timing? My timing is fine.
One question. With electric vehicles coming on the front now, big problem is there's no recharging stations. Is anyone looking into this problem with the government or industry?
Yes, yeah. And you raise a very, very important point, and it goes beyond your point on electric vehicles. To give you an example, if you have a neighborhood of 25 houses, you have 2 or 3 electric vehicles that are being charged in that neighborhood, you have exhausted the capacity of the grid. So the grid's ability to handle that is a problem. Another issue in batteries, everybody's trying to talk about solid-state lithium batteries, but lithium, you said, well, we got some lithium, but another component is cobalt, and it's really important. and it comes out of a country in Africa that has got some real problems. And when you get into some of the materials issues on electrics, it's like a lot of things in our lives. You think that, oh, this is the answer. There are multiple answers. The charge time is an answer. The grid is an issue. Materials are an issue. Economics are an issue. Space. If we can go to a solid state lithium battery, a lot of things will get better. A lot of people think they're close. Maybe not quite there yet. But it's just one of those question marks related to this industry that is uncertain. And the point you make is really important. That is, we tend to think of one thing rather than the plethora of things that have to be dealt with realistically. And we don't do that very well. And that's why I mentioned this systems thinking. If you take your eye off the big picture and just focus on the detail, it's very easy to make some mistakes. One of the most fascinating things now is to watch Tesla. And I've driven the Model 3, and it's a really nice driving car. I've looked at the other ones. I was giving a talk at a tooling conference in Grand Rapids about 2 years ago, and it was really fascinating. And one of the things that people told me is that the average Chrysler, FCA, GM, Ford, everybody in the world practically, you build prototype tooling, and then you find out what doesn't work, and you build production tooling. You know what Tesla does? It takes prototype tooling into production. And if you've ever looked at Teslas, the fit and finish is really terrible. You know, misalignment. Somebody at the office building, the North Campus Research Complex, I don't know him, has a Tesla Model S, and it would not have gotten out of any of your factories. It would have been totally unacceptable. It's a wild story underway. Well, everybody, thanks very much. All the best to all of you. It's been my pleasure to be here.